a twist of fate, my girlfriend of a decade found herself expecting a child with my younger brother, just weeks ahead of our wedding. Heartbreakingly, she chose to leave me and start a new life with him. Fast forward 6 years, and a tragic event has unfolded, prompting my estranged family to reach out for a favor. At 32 years old, I find myself living apart from my family for the last 6 years, a separation brought on by a significant event that shattered our bonds. Let me share the whole situation with you in the clearest way I can. 6 years back, I found myself engaged to my high school sweetheart, Sophie, who is also 32 these days. From the moment we were just 16, our journey together began, and now, at 26, we are ready to take the beautiful step of marriage. Everything felt just right, and I couldn't wait to embark on this journey of life together. It was in our high school biology class, at the age of 16, that I first crossed paths with Sophie. As lab partners, I found myself captivated by her sharp intellect and delightful sense of humor from the very start. For our first date, I carefully set aside my allowance for weeks, all to treat her to a lovely restaurant in town. In a moment of sheer nerves, I found myself knocking over my water glass. But there was Sophie, laughing it off and lending a hand to help me tidy up the mess. In that moment, it became clear to me just how special she truly was. During my high school years, I made it a point to cherish every moment spent with Sophie. On her 17th birthday, I decided to surprise her with a scavenger hunt that took us all around town, leaving little clues at each of our favorite places. The last clue brought her to our neighborhood park, where I had arranged a picnic filled with all her favorite treats. Her eyes sparkled with joy the moment she laid eyes on it. As we embarked on our journeys to different colleges, I felt a strong resolve to nurture our long-distance relationship and keep it thriving. Each weekend, I would embark on a 3-hour journey to see her, regardless of the pile of schoolwork waiting for me. During exam weeks, I would surprise her with care packages brimming with her favorite snacks, stress relief goodies, and heartfelt handwritten notes to lift her spirits. Once we graduated and returned to our hometown, I took on extra shifts at work, all in hopes of saving up for that dream vacation we had always talked about. In a moment of inspiration, I decided to surprise Sophie with a 2-week adventure across Europe, a dream she had held close to her heart for so long. Our journey took us through the enchanting streets of Paris, the historic charm of Rome, and the vibrant life of London. Once upon a time in Paris, I found myself on a private boat tour gliding along the Seine River as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The image of her beauty, framed by the sparkling Eiffel Tower, remains vivid in my mind. When Sophie shared her desire to return to school for her master's degree, I was all in with my support. In my journey, I decided to take on a second job to support her tuition and living expenses. There I was, staying up late into the night, quizzing her for her exams and meticulously proofreading her papers, all while knowing I had to rise early for work the next day. To celebrate our 10th anniversary, I decided to recreate our very first date. Once again, I found myself at that familiar restaurant, seated at the very same table. I slipped into an outfit that echoed the past, and I had a little plan with the waiter to recreate that moment by having him accidentally spill my water. Sophie burst into laughter, declaring it was absolutely perfect. After dinner, I led her to the beach, the very spot of our first kiss, and there, beneath the stars, I proposed to her. Reflecting on the past, it brings a sense of sorrow to recall all these memories. I poured my heart and soul into our relationship, genuinely convinced that we were crafting a life together. The betrayal cut steeper, a sharp reminder of the love I poured into her, only to watch her toss it aside so effortlessly. Just a few days ahead of our wedding, Sophie approached me with some surprising news. She shared the news with me that she was expecting, but the little one wasn't my own. For quite some time, she had been involved with my younger brother Ethan behind my back. After carefully calculating everything, she was convinced that the baby belonged to him. My heart shattered and anger surged within me, but the deepest wound came when Sophie confessed her feelings for Ethan, revealing her desire to marry him instead of me. It seemed as though everything I knew was falling apart, piece by piece. In a moment filled with anger and pain, I found myself confiding in my parents, sharing every detail of what I was going through. I thought they would share my shock and upset, but to my surprise, they appeared strangely calm about everything that had happened. My parents had always seen Ethan as their shining star, but I never anticipated such a deep sense of betrayal. They said I ought to feel joy for my brother. My mother was filled with excitement at the thought of becoming a grandmother, seemingly overlooking my own feelings about the whole situation. It was hard to wrap my mind around the words that reached my ears. In a heartbeat, it seemed as though my whole family had united against me. The very ones who should have loved and supported me were urging me to simply accept this profound betrayal and pretend that all was well. Overwhelmed by the betrayal from Sophie, Ethan, and even my parents, I found myself at a crossroads and ultimately chose to walk away. With a sense of determination, I gathered my belongings, ventured to a new city, and decided to leave the past behind by severing ties with everyone. It all began 6 years ago. Throughout those years, my father reached out to me on a handful of occasions, yet each of those conversations felt heavy and awkward. My mother, along with Ethan and Sophie, never made any effort to connect with me. I was completely unaware of the name of Ethan's child, my very own nephew. I did my best to carry on with my life. As I navigated through my career, I found myself making new friends and even dipping my toes back into the dating scene. Yet, the shadows of my past with Sophie lingered, making it difficult to fully open my heart again. In the midst of it all, I found myself gradually crafting a fresh chapter, distancing myself from the hurt and treachery that once defined my journey. Just a few days ago, I received an unexpected call from my mother. It was quite a shock to find her name lighting up my phone screen after such a long time apart. When I picked up the phone, her voice was filled with distress as she revealed that Ethan had been involved in a terrible accident. He found himself in a situation where he could no longer move, leaving him unable to provide for his family or fulfill his responsibilities. Upon hearing this news, a whirlwind of emotions washed over me. It was a mix of disbelief and sorrow that washed over me when I learned about Ethan's accident. Through all the ups and downs, he remained my brother. Yet, there was a part of me that couldn't shake off the anger, realizing that after 6 long years of silence, this was the reason my mother chose to reconnect. Her next words ignited a fire of anger within me. She shared with me that the family was in need of my assistance. She reached out to me with a heartfelt request, asking if I could return and take on the role of a father figure for Ethan's child, while also supporting Sophie and caring for the family during Ethan's recovery. In that moment, a fire ignited within me. In the wake of all that had transpired, it was hard to fathom how she could believe this was a reasonable request. I firmly said no to her. I reminded her of the deep betrayal I faced from Sophie and Ethan, the kind that cuts to the core, and how she and my father had made the choice to stand by them instead of me. I expressed that I felt no duty to assist them at this point, particularly after so many years of silence between us. My mother became upset and pointed a finger at me, saying I was being selfish. She shared her wisdom, emphasizing that family should always take precedence and encouraging me to release the burdens of the past. She attempted to make me feel guilty by saying that Ethan's child needed a father figure and that Sophie was having a tough time managing everything by herself. I held my position firmly and declined once more. I shared with her that Ethan and Sophie had made their decision 6 years back, and now they were facing the outcomes of that choice. I expressed that it wasn't my duty to intervene and create a facade of happiness simply because they were facing challenges. As I was about to end the call, I made it clear to my mother that I didn't want to hear from her again unless it was to express regret for the way they had treated me 6 years back. I mentioned that I could consider the possibility of rekindling our relationship if they recognized the pain they had caused me. However, I made it clear that I would never take on the role of a substitute for Ethan or a father figure to his child. Once the call wrapped up, a whirlwind of emotions washed over me. There was a conflict within me. A small voice whispered of guilt for abandoning my family in their time of need, yet a louder voice roared with anger and pain, echoing the wounds of the past. The wound that had begun to mend was suddenly torn wide, unleashing a torrent of pain and betrayal that rushed back in an overwhelming wave. Ever since that call, I've found myself wrestling with this decision. On one hand, I understand that Ethan's accident isn't the child's fault, and my heart aches for the kid who has to navigate life without a fully present father. On the flip side, it feels unjust for my family to anticipate that I will come to the rescue and mend everything after they turned their backs on me and chose to overlook me for so long. There are those among my friends who believe that my choice is completely warranted. It's often said that my family has crafted their own fate, and now they must face the consequences. Yet, there are those who believe I might be too tough and suggest that I should at least think about offering assistance for the child's sake. I'm feeling a bit conflicted about my next steps. There's a part of me that yearns to hold on to the life I've created, a life untouched by the drama and hurt of what came before. Yet, a part of me questions whether I'm holding on too tightly and if there's a way I could lend a hand without entirely compromising my own peace. Hey, Reddit, I'm wondering if I'm in the right for not helping my brother and his family after he took my fiancée and got her pregnant. Edit, I truly appreciate all of your responses and insights. Thank you. Let me share some thoughts on a few common points and offer a bit more context. For those curious about my dating journey, I have indeed been on dates since Sophie, but I haven't found myself in any serious long-term relationships. The betrayal truly shook my foundation of trust, and I've been navigating those waters in therapy. There have been numerous inquiries about my certainty regarding the child's paternity being Ethan's. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. Back then, Sophie was convinced about the timing, but I never came across any evidence to support either side of the story. She decided to go with Ethan, so the paternity situation remains pretty much the same for me. For those suggesting I should pay Ethan a visit in the hospital, I'm giving it some thought. Though forgiveness isn't on my mind just yet, I'm curious to learn more about what he's going through and what the future holds for him. Some comments hinted at the idea of providing financial assistance without getting directly involved. This is an idea that hadn't crossed my mind before, and it seems like it could be an interesting path to explore. For anyone interested in the nature of my father's calls throughout the years, they tended to be quite surface level in their conversations. He never offered an apology or recognized the pain he caused, leaving the relationship in a state of tension. There were inquiries about other family members. I have a handful of cousins I keep in contact with, though they reside in various states and weren't deeply engaged in what unfolded. Many people feel that they have no obligations to others, yet extending a hand could lead to a sense of tranquility within. I'm grateful for this viewpoint and will take some time to reflect on it. I truly appreciate everyone's contributions once more. This situation is intricate and filled with emotions, and your comments have sparked a lot of reflection for me. I'll keep you posted if anything noteworthy comes up. Hey everyone. It's been a few weeks since I last shared, and oh, so much has unfolded since then. Let me share with you the latest on my situation. Even though I initially turned them down, my parents persisted in their efforts. It was heartwarming to see my mother calling me almost every day, and to my surprise, my father began reaching out more often too. They urged me to think twice about my choice, sharing how deeply Ethan and his family relied on my support. Initially, I brushed off their calls and messages, but as the weeks went by with their relentless outreach, I began to feel the weight of it all. A tiny spark of curiosity flickered within me regarding Ethan's condition, despite the lingering anger I felt about everything that had transpired. After nearly 3 weeks of waiting, I made the decision to go see Ethan in the hospital. I convinced myself it was merely to gauge the severity of his condition, not because I was contemplating offering assistance. As I stepped into the hospital, a wave of anxiety twisted my stomach into knots. It had been 6 long years since I last saw any of my family members in person, and I found myself wondering how I would feel when we finally reunited. Stepping into Ethan's room, I found him resting in the hospital bed. He appeared frail and ghostly, connected to an array of machines that hummed softly around him. Seeing my once vibrant younger brother in this condition was truly a shock. My parents joined in as well. They seemed to have aged since the last time I saw them, their hair now streaked with gray and their faces marked by more wrinkles. As they caught sight of me, their excitement bubbled over, and they hurried towards me with open arms, but I took a step back. I found myself caught off guard by the depth of closeness that moment brought. And there she was, Sophie. There she was, by Ethan's bedside, her expression a mix of fatigue and concern. As our gazes locked, a wave of memories washed over me. I found myself reflecting on the countless moments I had placed my trust in her, and the dreams we had woven for our shared future. Reflecting on our journey together, I remember how she was my closest friend, my trusted confidant, the one I envisioned sharing my life with. And then it hit me, the way she had so effortlessly discarded everything we had, how she had turned against me in the most painful manner, entwining herself with my own brother. Reuniting with Sophie after all these years stirred up a whirlwind of pain and anger that I thought I had left behind. The temptation to turn on my heels and leave the hospital was almost overwhelming. I chose not to have a conversation with Sophie. I turned to my father to inquire about Ethan's condition. He shared the news that Ethan had been involved in a car accident, resulting in a spinal cord injury. He found himself paralyzed from the waist down, facing the long road ahead filled with extensive rehabilitation. There was a time when the doctors cast doubt on whether he would ever take another step on his own. In the midst of our conversation, my father shared a thought that truly surprised me. He shared that a paternity test was conducted shortly after the child's birth, confirming that Ethan was truly the father. It was a revelation I hadn't anticipated, a moment that solidified the sense of betrayal I had been grappling with. As we chatted away, a little boy, probably around 5 or 6, wandered into the room. It dawned on me that this must be the son of Ethan and Sophie, my nephew. Once upon a time, There was a boy who found himself in a place filled with strange machines and bright lights. He looked around, his eyes wide with confusion and a hint of fear, as the unfamiliar hospital equipment surrounded him. Sophie brought him to me, calling him her uncle. For a little while, I had the chance to chat with the boy. We exchanged greetings, and I asked him about the toys and games he loves the most. It felt surreal to encounter this child, my biological nephew, someone I had only just discovered existed not long ago. Following the hospital visit, my mother urged me to come over to their house for a deeper conversation. With a heavy heart, I found myself agreeing, driven by the desire to put this entire situation behind me. As I settled into the familiar surroundings of our home, my mother began to share her thoughts on the importance of family responsibility. She emphasized how crucial it was for me to step up and support Sophie and the little one during Ethan's recovery. She shared the story of how overwhelmed Sophie felt, juggling the care for Ethan, raising a child, and managing their household all by herself. As I absorbed her words, a wave of anger began to swell within me. As she took a moment to breathe, I seized the opportunity to share my true feelings with her. I pointed out that she was being selfish, focused solely on Ethan, just as she always had been. I noted that throughout all her calls and during this entire conversation, she never once inquired about how I was doing or expressed any interest in my life over the past 6 years. I shared with her my feelings, expressing that it felt as though her reaching out was driven more by a need for something from me rather than a genuine desire to mend our relationship. I expressed my pain, feeling that her concern for Ethan's well-being overshadowed any care she had ever shown for me, especially after he had hurt me so deeply. My mother attempted to explain herself, insisting that she truly cared about me, but that Ethan's situation was urgent and needed immediate attention. She mentioned that being the healthy brother came with a duty to lend a hand. With a deep breath, I shared my final decision with her. I expressed that although I understood the difficulties Ethan was enduring and the struggles his family was encountering, I couldn't sacrifice my own life and tranquility to assist them. I shared how I had dedicated years to crafting a new life, navigating through the hurt and betrayal they had inflicted upon me, and I was determined not to give up all that I had achieved. I shared with her that there might be a possibility of rekindling our relationship down the line, but it would depend on their willingness to recognize the pain they caused me and to put in the effort to rebuild the trust that was lost. I expressed my stance that this relationship would not mean stepping in as a substitute for Ethan or taking on the role of a father figure for his child. My parents were not pleased with the choice I made. They labeled me as selfish, accusing me of abandoning my family in their time of need, yet I remained resolute. I reminded them that their choice had been made 6 years prior when they backed Ethan and Sophie instead of me, and now they must face the repercussions of that decision. Before I departed, I shared with them my willingness to keep the lines of communication open and to nurture our relationship as time went on. However, I made it clear that this would only be possible if they could honor my boundaries and demonstrate a true interest in my life, rather than solely focusing on what I could offer them. That evening, as I made my way home, a whirlwind of emotions washed over me. There was a tug at my heart, a whisper of guilt for not stepping in more, particularly when I imagined Ethan's son navigating life with a father who faced challenges. Yet, amidst that, a stronger wave of relief washed over me. At last, I found the courage to stand up for myself and establish clear boundaries with my family. I came to understand that, although family ties hold significance, they do not grant anyone the permission to mistreat or exploit you. After years of healing from their betrayal, I found myself resolute in not reopening those wounds simply because they had suddenly decided they needed me again. Since that visit, my parents have reached out a few times. The conversations have been a bit charged, yet there's a noticeable effort on their part to inquire about my life, rather than solely focusing on Ethan. It's a tiny step, yet it fills me with hope that perhaps, as time goes on, we can cultivate a more nurturing relationship. At this moment, my attention is directed towards nurturing my own life and well-being. I've begun my journey with a therapist once more, diving into the emotions that have surfaced as I reconnect with my family. I've been immersing myself in my work and cherishing the moments with friends who have stood by me through everything. As I reflect on my journey, I find myself uncertain about what lies ahead for my relationship with my family. Yet, deep down, there's a sense of assurance that the choice I made was the right one for me. I'm willing to take the time to rebuild our connection, but it will be on my own terms and at a pace that feels right for me. I truly appreciate all the support and guidance you've offered me during this challenging time. After a tough few weeks, I sense that I've reached a point of closure, and I'm eager to embrace the next chapter of my life.